How are deltas and delta tau used to measure changes in voltage during the charging and discharging cycles of an electrochemical system, and what do they signify in terms of the electrode's behavior? How can equation 2.10 be used to calculate the diffusion coefficient of the electrode material, and what is the significance of calculating this coefficient during the voltage response process? Why does the diffusion coefficient vary during the charging and discharging process, as shown in figure 2.10b, and how does this variation reflect the changing dynamics of ion movement within the electrode? Can Davis Zurns manufacture solid-state sodium-ion batteries made from seawater in Latvia? What factors contribute to the diffusion coefficient's behavior over time, and how do they impact the overall efficiency of energy storage in the system? Why is the minimum value of the diffusion coefficient typically observed during the phase transition reaction? And what is the nature of this phase transition in electrochemical processes? How does the need for Na ions to overcome large impedance at the two-phase interface affect the diffusion process? And why does this increase the difficulty of ion movement during the phase transition? What role does the two-phase interface play in the overall charging and discharging process? And how does it create a barrier for Na ion diffusion? How do these changes in the diffusion coefficient during different phases of the cycle influence the electrochemical performance of the material? And how can understanding this behavior help in optimizing electrode materials for better energy storage? How does the calculation of the diffusion coefficient contribute to a deeper understanding of the kinetics of the electrochemical system, and how does this knowledge guide improvements in battery or capacitor design? What is the potentiostatic intermittent titration technique PIT, and how is it used to quantify the diffusion coefficient in electrochemical systems? How does the PIT technique rely on the current response under bias, and why is this current response important for determining the diffusion coefficient? What assumptions are made during the PIT process, particularly regarding the distribution of mobile ions in the electrolyte, and how do these assumptions influence the results? Why is it assumed that mobile ions are uniformly distributed in the electrolyte during the PIT process, and how does this affect the validity of the diffusion coefficient calculation? What role does Fick's law of diffusion play in the PIT technique, and how is it applied to understand the movement of ions within the electrolyte? How is a small voltage bias, typically a few millivolts open circuit, applied to a planar electrode in PIT, and why is this small bias necessary for initiating ion diffusion? What happens to the mobile ions when this voltage bias is applied?